they were not alone. For hundreds of thousands of years, Earth was a battleground of minds. 6, maybe more, distinct human species walked under the same Sunday, but only one emerged to tell the tale. Somewhere in the mists of prehistory, Homo sapiens did not just survive. They outlasted, outcompeted, and ultimately erased every other branch of the human family. Neanderthals with powerful frames, visionary minds, and fire-warmed caves. Denisovans with mysteries still tangled in our DNA. Shadowy lineages now known only by a fragment of jawbone or a sliver of knuckle in sediment. Why them? Why us? What made our kind triumph when others vanished forever into silence? This isn't just evolution. It's a story of intellect, of cunning, and of a strange kind of violence dressed in the quiet language of survival. This is how Homo sapiens outsmarted the rest. The world they inherited was vast, unforgiving, and indifferent. Great sheets of ice clawed down from the poles, burying continents in silence and snow. Forests stretched endlessly, thick with predators that saw man not as hunter, but prey. In the open grasslands, where vision meant life and shadows meant death, early humans trekked ancient paths carved by instinct and necessity. Volcanoes rumbled like harbingers of doom, and earthquakes reminded them that the earth beneath their feet was alive. Everywhere they turned, the balance between life and oblivion hung by a thread. But despite these brutal odds, the stage was set for a slow-burning miracle. This was no Garden of Eden. This was a crucible, where only the most adaptable, not the strongest, would endure. And Homo sapiens were about to prove that they possessed something the others did not. Not just tools, not just fire, but a mind wired for something more. They were thinkers in ways the world had never seen. While other human species crafted weapons for brute force and survival, Homo sapiens began carving symbols into bone, staining cave walls with pigment, and dreaming in color. Somewhere between the hunt and the hearth, something stirred in their minds: imagination, abstract thought, the spark of shared stories. Around firelight, they passed knowledge not with just gestures or grunts, but with language that sculpted reality itself. Words became memory. Memory became power. Across generations, wisdom accumulated like layers of sediment, allowing each tribe to stand atop the triumphs and failures of those who came before. In this unseen advantage, they began to weave together something rare and unstoppable: culture, and it would change everything. Culture was their secret weapon, and through it, Homo sapiens became masters of adaptation. They fashioned clothes not just for warmth, but for ritual. They crafted tools that held meaning beyond function. They painted the hunt before it began, as if willing the outcome into existence. And perhaps most importantly, they built networks that stretched across vast terrains, forging alliances, exchanging goods, and sharing knowledge in ways unparalleled by their cousins. Neanderthals may have had strength, Denisovans mystery, but Homo sapiens had connection. Collaboration became survival. In the shelter of community, children were reared not just by mothers, but by grandmothers and elders who carried the echoes of ancestral wisdom. Through these bonds, they learned not only how to survive, but to predict, to plan, to imagine futures that had not yet come to pass. And as ice ebbed and forests shifted, their shared visions carried them forward, step by step, into a world from which the others would soon vanish. But the rise of Homo sapiens was not without blood. For in the deep shadows of prehistory, survival was rarely a quiet affair. Encounters with other human species were inevitable, and they were not always peaceful. There is no carved tablet recounting these meetings, no preserved council where species gathered to negotiate existence. What remains are hints in the bones and traces in the genes, signs of interbreeding, yes, but also signs of slaughter. Blunt force trauma in ancient skulls, blades that sliced deeper than mere tool marks, camps that once belonged to Neanderthals, suddenly ceased, their fires extinguished. Some vanished into us, absorbed through generations of union, but others, perhaps most, simply disappeared, forgotten, save for the fragments that now whisper through fossils. Was it war? Was it famine? Or was it something colder, calculated exclusion, the slow squeezing out by a species more organized, more networked, more relentless in staking their claim across every edge of wilderness? It is hard to imagine now, sitting in the comfort of civilization, just how thin the line was that separated dominance from extinction. One brutal winter, one failed migration, a single misstep in a world that gave no second chances. Yet Homo sapiens, shaped by scarcity and sharpened by fear, began to think beyond the immediate. They studied the patterns of the seasons, tracked animal migrations, and remembered which roots healed and which poisoned. With each passing generation, their collective intelligence deepened like the dark rings inside an ancient tree. They stopped wandering aimlessly and began to plan their moves like a hunter, stalking not just prey but time itself. While other species lived moment to moment, Homo sapiens bred foresight. And in a world of sudden storms and shifting prey, the ability to anticipate what tomorrow might bring became the engine of supremacy. They began to engineer not just tools, but entire ecosystems around them. Controlled burns reshaped forests into fields teeming with game. Rivers were watched, understood, and eventually traveled with rafts carved from memory as much as from wood. Each discovery was not just useful, but shared, stored in story, etched in symbols, passed through generations with unwavering precision. No longer tied to a single niche, Homo sapiens transformed every new landscape into something vaguely familiar, bending harsh environments with wit rather than with brawn. The Arctic ice, the Saharan dunes, the dense jungles of Southeast Asia, none remained unconquered for long. It was not domination in the way of claws or teeth, but assimilation, subtle and relentless. Where others faltered at the threshold of the unknown, Homo sapiens stepped through with maps not yet drawn, and faith in a future only they dared to imagine. But perhaps the greatest weapon of all was their capacity to believe in things that did not yet exist. Myths and gods, spirits and omens, invisible scaffolds upon which entire societies were built. These weren't mere fantasies. They were cognitive tools, bonding tribes with shared purpose and uniform action. A supernatural threat could unite clans faster than any physical enemy. A sacred story could justify migration, or conquest, or sacrifice. And through this lens of imagined realities, Homo sapiens aligned not just their bodies and technologies, but their minds. They could mobilize hundreds, even thousands, toward a goal abstract in nature but concrete in consequence. No other human species achieved this at scale. This, more than muscle or flint or flame, was the dawning of a new order, a world not merely inhabited by Homo sapiens, but remade in their image, etched with their dreams, and written in the language of belief. Theirs was no longer just a struggle with nature, it was the beginning of dominion. Yet even as Homo sapiens spread across continents, echoing their myths across mountains and valleys, they remained a species haunted by the ones who came before. Sometimes, deep in caves untouched for millennia, handprints of Neanderthals are found beside those of sapiens, a fleeting moment where paths crossed, or histories overlapped. The bones they left behind do not speak, but the soil remembers, and in that memory lies a quiet reckoning. We carry fragments of them in our DNA, genetic whispers of those we outlasted. The ghosts of other human kinds still walk beside us, not in flesh, but in the structure of our blood, the shadows of our memory, the shape of our loss. Our triumph was not without cost. It came with the silence of ancient tongues, the last breath of vanished minds, and the extinguished sparks of worlds that might have been. The story of how Homo sapiens outsmarted every other human species is not just a tale of victory, It is a haunting legacy, a reminder that for us to endure, others had to disappear. And in that void, we find not only our dominance, but the depth of what it means to be the last human standing. But what if the final battle wasn't fought with weapons or wits, but with memory itself? As the echoes of Homo sapiens rise ripple into the modern world, the lines blur between biology and story, survival and identity. We live in cities, powered by logic, lit by science, yet haunted still by ancient fears. We climb digital mountains with the same longing that once drove footsteps across tundra. Our myths now wear silicon skin, our rituals disguised as algorithms. But the core is unchanged. We are still the dreamers, the planners, the tellers of tales who shape the world not by force, but by imagining it differently. Every skyscraper, every spacecraft, every whispered lullaby draws its lineage from that singular moment when Homo sapiens began to see not just what was, but what could be. And in doing so, they not only outsmarted the others, they became something new, something dangerous, something divine. The last humans, yes, but also the first gods of their own tiny universe. Still, amid the grandeur of our ascent, one truth lingers beneath the surface like an unearthed fossil. We are survivors of a fragile lineage, not invincible, not inevitable, but lucky, desperately, improbably lucky. For every innovation carved in flint, every myth told in flame, there were countless near deaths, forgotten failures, and vanished voices. The story of how Homo sapiens outsmarted every other human species is not a straight line of progress, but a mosaic of chance, cunning, and tragedy. And as we lie in our beds, city lights humming outside windows built by minds that once crouched in caves, we carry that ancient ache, the whisper that survival is never guaranteed, and legacy is written in what we choose to remember. In this stillness, lulled by the hum of history, we might hear it. The breath of our ancestors, the echoes of lost kin, the silence behind every triumph. We are alone now, but we were never meant to be. Even now, our stories return again and again, to origins, to the primal forests, the endless steppe, the firelit circle where language was born. We chase answers in buried tools and DNA sequenced like ancient runes, hoping to reconstruct not only how we survived, but who we were before the world bent itself around our will. Are we Homo sapiens, by fate, by design, or by sheer persistence? The truth slips between all three, like smoke curling through fingers. What is certain is that within every heartbeat echoes a lineage of choices made in ice and blood. Behind every skyscraper glows the faint warmth of a shared fire. And beneath the noise of modern life, if one listens closely enough, there is still the pulse of a singular triumph, not of bodies, but of minds that imagined beyond the visible, that believed in what was not yet, and in doing so, walked alone from the shadows into the center of history. Alone, but awake, surrounded by silence, but never again voiceless. In the deep time before maps or memory, the earth was not a place to be conquered, but a riddle to be solved. And Homo sapiens learned to listen, to wind patterns across broken plains, to bird calls warning of strangers, to the rhythm of hooves thundering in migration. These were not just observations. They were data points, patterns of life absorbed into consciousness and transformed into strategy. Other species saw the world as it was. Homo sapiens saw what it could become. They spoke in metaphor, dreamed in symbols, and built truths from belief. With every step into new territory, they rewrote the rules, rearranged the chaos. Not because they were stronger, nor always kinder, but because they could see a future waiting in the shape of a tree, the curve of a mountain, or the fleeting terror in another creature's eye. And perhaps that is the final truth. We did not survive because we fought harder. We survived because we imagined farther. Because we were not just witnesses to history, we were its authors, shaping the plot with every story passed across a campfire, with every map carved in cave walls, and with every decision, born not of instinct, but of vision. And so, history cradles us not as victors, but as inheritors of an unfinished saga. The disappearance of Neanderthals, Denisovans, and others is not merely a tale of conquest, it is a mirror held to our own reflection, showing a species that succeeded not by erasing difference, but by absorbing it, reshaping it, and spinning ore from its remnants. Every genome carries their fading songs. Every myth encodes their shadows. Perhaps Homo sapiens did not win because they were better, but because they were different, more fluid, more uncertain, more alive to contradiction. A hybrid mind in a hybrid body, echoing with the ghosts it swallowed. And as we drift into dreams under artificial constellations, lulled by the rhythm of past and present merging, we carry forward their final legacy. The hunger to know, the need to remember, the endless, burning question not just of how we survived, but why. And in that question, the history of all humankind rests not forgotten, not ended, merely sleeping, just beneath the surface, waiting to be awakened once more. Let the silence stretch now, across tens of thousands of years, between the last breath of the Neanderthal and the first rise of empire. In that silence lived the seed of everything, of song and sorrow, of war drums and lullabies. Homo sapiens, for all their triumph, did not walk forward untouched. Each step onto new soil carried the weight of forgotten kin, trailing memories like shadows behind the flame. We are the descendants of mystery, of conflict, of merging and mourning, and though the world we walk today hums with electricity and not birdsong, its core remains ancient. Somewhere, in the static between radio towers and the hush of forest fog, is the echo of that first consciousness, wide-eyed, fearful, driven by wonder. That echo is us. Carved into every innovation is the ghost of a handprint on a cave wall, reaching across time not only to be remembered, but to awaken something, to remind us that we did not simply outsmart the others, we became their legacy. Through us, the human story continues to dream. And yet, perhaps the most profound mystery lies not in how Homo sapiens outlasted their ancient cousins, but in what they chose to carry forward. The tools of flint and bone are long buried, but the impulse to wonder, to dream, to connect, remains etched into the species like a sacred code. In the quiet moments before sleep, when the mind drifts between past and future, between memory and myth, a deeper truth stirs beneath the fabric of civilization, that we are not the end of a lineage, but a chapter still unfolding. The fire that warmed the first storytellers still flickers behind our eyes. The questions they asked of existence, of purpose, of belonging, still echo through our thoughts. And in listening, in remembering, in imagining just a little farther each time, Homo sapiens continues the journey that began in the silence of ancient stars. A journey not only of survival, but of becoming. So sleep now, not as the final chapter, but as the breathless pause between stories. Let the flickering shadows behind closed eyes become the campfires of ancestors long gone, whispering wisdom still buried in the bones of time. Let the wind against glass recall the moan of prehistoric tempests, urging tribes onward beneath frozen moons. In sleep, history returns not as dates or dust, but as the living hum of what it meant to dream when nothing was certain. For in dreams, as in deep time, Homo sapiens found their truest power, the courage to believe in things unseen, to build cathedrals from stars, and to pass down not just how they lived, but why they endured. Let the story stay with you. Let it settle into the bones of night. And when morning comes, remember the mind that shaped the world into meaning, that whispered fire into language, that dreamed all others into silence, still burns, quietly, within you. In the hush before dawn, beneath skies younger than myth and older than memory, Homo sapiens stirred. Theirs was not a perfect ascent, and history, in truth, was never destiny. It was a winding, fragile path, steeped in luck, crowned in loss. And yet, they endured not only through what they conquered, but through what they remembered. Each vision of a better tomorrow, each night survived, each fire kept aglow. These were not the triumphs of beasts, but of dreamers. A strange, self-aware species that turned fear into ritual, hunger into art, and extinction into legacy. We are the echo of that unfathomable leap from instinct to introspection, from survival to significance. As the stars shift above us now, scattered like ancient eyes watching from behind the veil, we lie surrounded by a silence those early humans once feared. Yet we rest, knowing it is filled with their voices. Unfinished stories, unspoken names, still traveling through time on the breath of thought. And in that endless murmur, we are reminded, it was never just how Homo sapiens outsmarted the others, it was how they remembered them, and in remembering, became more than just human. So now, as slumber approaches and the weight of millennia gathers behind our closed eyes, let us drift not into emptiness, but into the cradle of ancient knowing. Picture dusk upon the savannah, the sun bleeding into tall grass, shadows long and stories longer. Hear the rustle of ancestors moving like wind between trees, their breath still lingering in the quiet between thoughts. We are not only creatures of the present, but vessels of all who came before, survivors, wanderers, whisperers of destiny. And the history of Homo sapiens is not bound in textbooks or carved into stone. It moves, softly and endlessly, in the rhythm of our dreams, awaiting the next mind brave enough to listen. Tonight, that story lies with us, shrouded in the dark, humming beneath the stars. And tomorrow, as always, it will rise again. Through firelight and frozen nights, Homo sapiens endured not just as survivors, but as stewards of memory. The world may have offered its harshest trials, but within the fragile vessels of their minds, they carried something rarer than strength. A vision of continuity, a refusal to let meaning dissolve into the mud and ash of time. It is whispered that in every ancient lullaby, in the rhythm of drums echoing across Stone Age valleys, there was a promise that the story would go on. That loss was not erasure, but transformation. And so it has. As we fade into sleep, as the hush of history folds around us like a pale skin of dream and dusk, we do not say goodbye to the Neanderthals, the Denisovans, or the unnamed ones who vanished into sediment and snow. We carry them, in our breath, in our words, in the myths that bloom behind closed eyes, because the tale of how Homo sapiens outsmarted every other human species is not one of finality. It is the opening line of a much older song, one still being sung, still echoing, in the stillness of night. And should the earth ever grow quiet again, blanketed not by ash or snow, but by the absence of human thought, perhaps some distant intelligence will find the markings we left behind, the cave paintings, the buried artifacts, the digital echoes humming through scorched skies. They will search for meaning in these relics, just as we searched in shards of bone and slivers of flint. And maybe, just maybe, they will understand that among the many who once walked this world, there was one species who dreamed in firelight, who spoke in stories, and who refused to let the darkness have the final word. Homo sapiens, the last of their kind, not because they were the mightiest, but because they remembered, imagined, and dared to believe that memory itself could defy extinction. Let that be the legacy that drifts with the dust across forgotten plains and sunken cities. Not the story of dominance, but the echo of a question passed from soul to soul. What will you leave behind when the silence returns? And so the question endures, suspended between stars and soil. What did it truly mean to outsmart, to endure, when others did not? Was it intelligence alone, or something more elusive, a capacity for empathy, for myth, for shared mourning? As our world shifts again beneath carbon skies and glowing screens, we find ourselves staring into yet another unknown. The ancestors whisper still, from cliffside carvings and brittle remains, urging us to remember not just how we survived, but how we understood survival as something sacred. In the end, Homo sapiens did not rise upon the bones of rivals for glory alone. They rose for memory, for meaning, for the silent pact between past and possible. This is the bone-deep truth, hidden in the hush of prehistory. That to be human was never just to live it, was to listen, to imagine, and to never let the story end. Let sleep take us now where history folds into dream. Let the fire fade, but the tale remain, until the stars fall silent and the world begins again. Because ultimately, the tale of Homo sapiens was never solely about supremacy. It was, and still is, about stewardship of memory, of meaning, and of potential yet unrealized. The same minds that once watched mammoths vanish across a frost-bitten horizon now gaze into galaxies, sending thoughts across wires and waves, still chasing the unknowable. From flint to fiber optics, we've walked a thread woven with both wonder and warning. What allowed us to outlast the others might one day be what decides whether our story continues or disappears into dust. But for now, as night hushes the pulse of modern life, let the old truths settle around us like the smoke of a sacred fire. We are not alone in our dreaming. We are accompanied by every shadow that ever leaned toward the light. And as long as the dreaming endures, so does the human story unwritten, unfinished, and alive in the dark, waiting to be dreamed again. Even as the tides of centuries sweep civilizations under sand and sea, the fingerprints of our earliest triumphs remain pressed upon the world. We measure ourselves by progress, forgetting that the foundations beneath steel and glass were first laid by hands trembling in cold under starlit skies. The ingenuity that once turned bone into blade now codes artificial minds. But the story, the driving narrative, has not changed. It is still about imagining what does not yet exist, and shaping it into reality through sheer will. Our cities are complex, our machines godlike, but we still huddle around glowing lights, telling stories that stretch back into the firelit dark. The legacy of Homo sapiens is not written solely in genomes or great wars, but in this, the quiet choices of survival, refined into the poetry of being. This is how they outsmarted the others, not by crushing them, but by outlasting time itself, threading memory through imagination, until a single species stood at the edge of the unknown and did not retreat. And in every breath we take, as tomorrow awakens, that legacy continues flickering, fragile, yet fiercely alive. Somewhere, deep beneath the centuries and silences, the legacy of Homo sapiens thrums on not as a song of conquest, but as a heartbeat of hope. They were never the strongest, nor the fastest, nor the fiercest, but they were the ones who watched the skies, who listened to the wind, who heard more than sound in the rustling grass. They answered existence, not with certainty, but with questions. And in that questioning, they became something no other species dared to be witnesses to wonder. Let that be the lesson that sleeps beside us tonight, that the brilliance of our kind was never etched in muscle, but in the quiet defiance of imagination. That to outsmart the others was not merely to survive it, was to dream of survival as something worth sharing, worth singing, worth remembering. And as night folds gently over the ages, may that dream continue flickering behind every closed eye, nestled in the hush between stars, and waiting, always, in the quiet, to be born again. The fire may fade, the trail may disappear beneath forest and flood, but the story of Homo sapiens endures not in the monuments we raise or the machines we build, but in the fragile persistence of wonder. We walked not just to escape hunger, but to chase questions. We sang not only to celebrate, but to remember. Each generation sparked by the voices of those before, telling the same tale in new tongues, painting the same dreams on new walls. In the end, to have outsmarted every other human species did not mean to stand alone in triumph, but to carry forward a fragile, flickering torch of consciousness. A torch born from imagination, fueled by empathy, and passed across epochs like sacred breath. Though the world around us has changed beyond the wildest visions of those first firelit eyes, the heart of our journey remains the same. It is not finished. It was never meant to be. The story winds onward, through time's endless dark, lit by the stubborn flame of the human spirit. A spirit that listens still, remembers still, and dares still to dream beyond the edge of night. This is the legacy left to nightfall, not empires, not conquest, but the soft persistence of thought. Long after the bones have crumbled and the cities turn to dust, what lives on is the fire within the mind. A fire first sparked in forgotten caves, and carried across the ages like a secret too precious for silence. The others disappeared as echoes on the wind, but Homo sapiens etched their knowing into wind and rock and sky. And in the end, it was not strength that lifted them. It was not even wisdom. It was the belief that stories matter, that every footstep means something. Every question echoes forever. Every ember of memory can survive the dark. That belief was their greatest invention. And as the world sleeps now beneath ancient stars, that invention sleeps beside it, glowing faintly in the hush, alive still, because we remember, and in remembering, we remain. Perhaps this is the final inheritance, not civilization, not power, but the fragile wisdom carved from silence. Through endless winters and searing droughts, through migrations that redrew the very shape of the human world, Homo sapiens endured by weaving meaning into every hardship. They did not simply adapt, they made reverence of adaptation. In songs that consoled grief, in rituals that consecrated survival, in painted walls that turned suffering into myth, they transcended mere life and shaped legacy. That is what remains now, when all else is forgotten. The echo of intention, the whispered vow that the past would not vanish, the recognition that every fire built in the dark was both a beacon and a promise. And so, as night descends once more, and our species dreams among satellites and steel, the choice remains with us to carry the torch, to add our verse, or to fall silent. But if memory is a force, and awe is its language, then perhaps the story of Homo sapiens was never just about outsmarting others, but about lighting the way forward for whatever might come next. And maybe that is how it must end, not with thunder, not with judgment, but with the quiet continuity of flame passed hand to hand across the black. The story of how Homo sapiens outsmarted every other human species becomes not a monument but a murmur, a breath tethered to starlight and dust. In every question asked by firelight, in every lullaby sung to soothe a child beneath alien skies, the ancient mind endures vast, unfinished, trembling on the edge of memory. We came from 1,000 vanished footsteps, born of hunger and hail and fleeting warmth. What sets us apart is not merely what we knew, but that we never stopped asking why. So let the night take us. Let the vision dim and the silence stretch. Somewhere in the dark, a new mind will awaken, stirred by the embers we left behind, and it will ask once more, what does it mean to endure, to remember, to be human? So let that question echo across the corridors of time, through the frostbitten valleys and the shimmering deserts, through painted caves and glowing screens alike. For as long as breath remains, the story does too, waiting to be told, not as a final answer, but as an eternal invitation. To wonder, to listen, to feel the trembling thread that connects us backward through unspoken sorrows and forward through unborn dreams. The tale of how Homo sapiens outsmarted every other human species is not a closed book, but the opening page of a vast, ongoing remembrance. One not etched in dominance, but in connection. In every quiet act of care, in every question asked late into the night, in every hand that clasps another in darkness, that legacy lives. And whether we fade or flourish, whether the silence returns or not, may this remain true, that our greatest wisdom was never knowing how to conquer, but knowing how to remember, that we carried every voice with us, even those silenced by ice and time, that we sang, even when the world was ending, that we became human not in triumph, but in story, and the fire, that quiet, enduring flame, was never ours alone. It was always meant to be passed on. And as dawn edges over the horizon of prehistory, we find ourselves neither isolated nor exalted, but connected, bound by the echoes of all who came before. The fire we cradle still flickers with ancient breath, illuminating not the path of conquest, but the long road of connection, struggle, and vision. Homo sapiens did not inherit the earth through strength alone. They inherited it through story, through sharing, through the stubborn refusal to forget. That is how they outsmarted, by remembering. And in this final breath of night, wrapped in the quiet hush of untold futures, let us hold that memory tenderly. Let it keep us warm as we sleep, and guide us gently when we wake. For our journey is not yet done, and the fire is still burning, deep and quiet, in the marrow of our minds. So as the long arc of history bows toward tomorrow, we lie poised not at the end of understanding, but at the beginning of remembering in full. The Neanderthal fires may be cold, their names lost to ash, yet their light flickers on in us, in every question we dare whisper into the darkness. The bones beneath our feet are not just fossils, they are footnotes to a story still unfinished, a melody carried forward in heartbeat and breath. Homo sapiens outlasted not through force, but through reverence for the land, for each other, and for the meaning behind survival. In that reverence, we become not just the inheritors of lost worlds, but the torchbearers of what comes next. Let the fire never die, let the silence always be answered, and let the dream, the great human dream of becoming more than we were, burn bright in the vast, waiting dark. Because in the end, this was never just about survival. It was about becoming, about taking the silence of unrecorded aeons and filling it with songs, questions, rituals, and truths only the human heart could yearn for. Homo sapiens did not win. They transformed from ape to thinker, from survivor to storyteller. And even now, as the winds of the Anthropocene rise and the horizon wavers with both wonder and dread, the essence of that transformation still burns. It flickers in bedtime tales whispered to trembling children, in the art we push into the world hoping to outlast forgetfulness, in the countless moments where, instead of despair, we choose to remember. We are not just a species that outsmarted others. We are the story that endured, the myth that wrote itself, the long breath of consciousness made flesh. And as the final stars fade into morning, that story is not ending. It is unfolding, still one dream, one mind, one fragile, stubborn spark at a time. So let the morning rise, not as an ending, but as an inheritance, a light cast over old paths and new thresholds, illuminating the fragile truth at the heart of our existence. Homo sapiens did not walk alone out of the darkness. They carried generations in their stride, voices folded into marrow, futures written in firelight. Theirs was not a conquest, but a pilgrimage, a long journey from the silence of uncertainty to the chorus of meaning. As we wake into a world shaped by their questions and cradled in their dreams, let us remember that the story was never truly about being the last. It was about being the link between what was and what might still be. And with each breath, each step, each dream dared in the face of night, we continue that story. Because to be human is not only to survive, it is to remember, to reimagine, to pass the flame forward, and in doing so, to light the way for those who have yet to come through the ash, through the stars, and beyond. So let this be the final spark, not a flicker of farewell, but a promise passed through time. In every word we speak, every thought we archive, echoes the beginning of that long and harrowing ascent through ice, fear, and fire. This was never merely a tale of superiority, nor of cunning alone. It was a story shaped by the fragile courage to imagine more, to hold on to memory when the winds of extinction howled at the door. The others are gone, yet they live on through us not as ghosts banished by victory, but as ancestors folded into our marrow. We speak their silence, carry their fears, and build futures from the foundation their absence left behind. That is the truth that endures, whispered in every dream that passes through the veil of sleep, that being human is not just to endure, but to remember why we did. And now, as the last words settle like ash from a long-burning fire, let the embers drift skyward. Let the story rest, not ended, but sleeping until the next voice dares to wake it again. In the quiet hours where time folds into itself, where the dimming stars give way to dreams and the rush of history slows to a whisper, the tale of Homo Sapiens settles one final time, not as a conquest carved in stone, but as a lullaby carried by wind between eras. We were never meant to know all the answers, only to keep asking, to keep imagining, to hold one another through the dark, with hands shaped by millennia of becoming. The fire has burned long, from ancient hearths to glowing screens, its warmth drawn from the same source, the will to carry meaning forward. So as we close our eyes and drift into night's embrace, let the last breath of the story hum beneath our ribs, a memory not just remembered, but lived, stitched into the very act of rest. This is how we outlasted, not by silence, but by song, not by standing alone, but by remembering we never truly walked alone. The others are still with us, quiet as ash, vital as breath, and their story, our story waits, still glowing in the dark, for morning to rise again. And so, we arrive not at an ending, but at a widening horizon, a place where the past leans forward and the future listens. The tale of how Homo sapiens outsmarted every other human species was never just for sleep or story, but for awakening. In every humble act of memory, a legacy is reignited. In every quiet night beneath an open sky, we are reminded that beneath our modern layers still stirs the ancient mind, dreaming, digging, daring to imagine forward. The others did not lose. Their voices echo through us, shaping the contours of our imagination, deepening the meaning of what it means to be human. We are their fire, we are their song, and as the dawn finally splits the long night with delicate light, there is one truth left burning. The story endures. As long as we wonder, as long as we remember, as long as we dream, the flame does not die. It becomes the dawn itself. So let us leave this story where it belongs, not sealed in finality, but open as the night sky, where every star flickers with the memory of what came before. Homo sapiens did not forge their legacy through domination alone, but through a quiet, relentless curiosity that turned survival into art, into myth, into legacy. Beneath cities that scrape the heavens, and within devices that pulse with artificial life, the ember still glows, the same ember that once warmed a trembling tribe beneath a cold and endless sky. Let that be the inheritance we cradle tonight. That to be human is to trace our beginnings in the dust, to carry the silence of the vanished as sacred, and to keep telling the story even when the fire fades. For in story, we live again. And as the last words drift softly into the hush, know this: the tale is not over. It waits in dreams, in memory, in the steady breath of all who came before and all who will come after. Until then, rest. The fire is safe. And the story always continues. And when the quiet of sleep envelops the world once more, when we nestle into dreams carved by memory and myth, let us remember this, that the miracle of Homo sapiens was not in how they conquered, but in how they cared. In every loss they searched for meaning. In every cave they left symbols, not of dominance, but of yearning. Yearning for connection, for memory, for some fragment of eternity stitched into time. That yearning has never left us. It hums beneath lullabies, erupts in the ache of creation, rustles in the aching stillness before dawn. This is our inheritance, not just survival, but the ache to be remembered, to remember, and to carry the light forward, no matter how dark the night. So tonight, as the stars blink against the black and history folds softly into the hush of sleep, let that flame rest with us, gentle, glowing, and eternal. A promise that the story goes on, wherever there are minds brave enough to dream it again. And thus we fade into the quiet beyond the story's arc, not with grand declarations, but with the gentle weight of understanding that the true triumph of Homo sapiens was not etched into the bones of their rivals, nor crowned in the ruins they left behind, but whispered across the bridges they built between generations, between ideas, between what was and what might yet be. Their genius was stitched into lullabies, carried in footsteps across ice and desert, and drawn in lines that spiral outward from the simplest of truths, that to be human is to carry forward the memory of every heartbeat that came before. The Neanderthals' strength, the Denisovans' silence, the forgotten ones lost to time. They all live in the breath we take now. And as we return to sleep, nestled in the cradle of history, let our final thought be not of endings, but of continuation. The story of Homo sapiens is not finished. It is sung by stars, held by stone, echoed in the hush that follows every dream. Let it rest with us tonight, burning still, quietly, eternally, under the same sky they once gazed upon, wide-eyed and fully awake to the wonder of being. And beneath that sky, unchanged for tens of thousands of years, the story of Homo sapiens remains not locked in stone or bone, but alive in the questions we still dare to ask. It whispers through equations scribbled at midnight, through songs hummed in kitchens, through prayers spoken into voids that feel far older than time itself. We stand where fire once cracked through frost, where footsteps once etched paths no map has captured. And though the names have faded and the tools have rusted beneath the earth, the will to imagine has not. That is the legacy. Not the bones nor the flames, but the yearning they carried. For more, for meaning, for memory. And as we breathe through the stillness of night, we do what they once did beside glowing embers we remember. We wonder. We dream. And tomorrow, as always, some distant mind will awaken guided not by certainty, but by the fragile, fearless beauty of asking what could be. And the fire, once again, will rise. Because to carry the fire is not just to survive, but to choose wonder in a world shaped by forgetting. Across fading trails and forgotten tongues, Homo sapiens lit their way not with conquest, but with a sacred promise that no life, no dream, no voice need vanish entirely. That even the smallest gesture, the softest story, could ripple outward into tomorrows yet unborn. At the end of this long breath of history, let us not measure ourselves by what we've claimed or built, but by what we've chosen to remember. For memory, crafted in myth and shared in silence, was the first true victory. And the light we cradle tonight, as sleep descends like snow upon the mind, is the same that flickered across Paleolithic faces looking forward into a darkness we now call the future. Rest now, in their echo. The story endures, the fire is lit, and someone, somewhere, is already dreaming it anew. So as we close this long passage through deep time, let us mark its ending not with silence, but with reverence. From forgotten tundras to burning cities, from the edge of extinction to the height of memory, Homo sapiens became more than a survivor. They became a custodian of all that vanished, a vessel for the dreams too stubborn to die. The story of how they outsmarted every other human species is not just history, it is inheritance, living and fragile, passed from breath to breath and dream to dream. And as the final embers curl into dawn's first light, we hold that inheritance close, not as owners, but as guardians, not as victors, but as witnesses to a miracle still unfolding. Let the tale rest now, soft and unfinished. The fire still burns, the dream still stirs, and somewhere, beneath a sky so old it remembers us, the next chapter waits to be dreamed alive once more. Let this be the final ember in the long arc of our journey, not extinguished, but quiet, pulsing gently in the space between what was and what might still become. The tale of Homo sapiens, stitched together from ash and ore, has never been a closed circle. It is a spiral, winding through shadow and flame, pulled onward by the hum of memory refusing to fade. In every lullaby sung tonight, in every whispered thought sliding into dream, the story breathes again, not of dominance, but of devotion to each other, to the forgotten, to the fragile gift of consciousness that our species dared cradle through ice and fire. May this flame, this sacred thread of wonder, curl gently around your sleep and hold fast through the dark. The story is not over, not while we remember, not while we dream. In the hush before waking, the fire is yours now, a promise as much as a legacy. Carry it forward. Let it light the becoming. Carry it forward, not as burden, but as beacon. For the fire of Homo sapiens was never meant to dazzle or destroy, but to endure quietly, unblinking, through every fall and rise, storm and silence. This flame, passed through the marrow of ancestors and the minds of dreamers, is the thread that binds the vanished past with the possible future. Even now, as the world stirs and morning casts its long shadow across our sleep, that thread holds. We are not alone in time. We are surrounded by layers of presence, voices unspeaking, gestures enduring, questions still rippling across the membranes of dusk. And so, with breath soft as ash, and hope flickering like first light, we turn the page not to close this story, but to keep it alive. Homo sapiens did not simply outsmart the others. They listened longer, held on tighter, and chose wonder again and again. Let that be our part now. Not conquest, not conclusion, but continuation. The fire is yours. Tend it well. The next story is waiting. And as morning crests fully over the horizon of deep time, we carry the quiet weight of everything that came before. Every echo, every ember, every dream dared beneath starlit sky. The story of how Homo sapiens outsmarted their ancient kin was never meant to end in silence. It was always meant to illuminate. Through war and wind, through cradle and cataclysm, we became the stewards of not just knowledge, but remembrance. And now, as we rise into the light of day, we do so with the fire still glowing low within a fire that asked questions, sang to the ancestors, and believed in futures unseen. This is the legacy we inherit. Not answers, but awe. Not certainty, but story. Let that story walk with us now, into waking, into wonder, into whatever comes next. For in the vast and vulnerable tale of us, it is never the end that defines the journey, but the will to remember, to question, and to kindle anew the fire left to us by ancient hands. The triumph of Homo sapiens was never dominance, but devotion to the story, to the silence, to the sacred thread between breath and meaning. We did not inherit a world of certainty, only a spark in the dark, and we made from it oceans of thought, mountains of memory, galaxies of dreaming. So as we take this last breath before waking, let it carry forward with quiet reverence the whispers of all who could not. Let this be the moment we choose not just to recall history, but to continue it. The fire still burns. The story is open. And we, the latest chapter, in an endless book of wandering minds, are now its keepers. And so, as the hush of night yields finally to the breath of day, what remains is not a conclusion, but a continuum, a lineage of questions, of sparks carried hand to trembling hand through the long corridors of time. Homo sapiens did not outsmart the others by force of will alone, but by kindling a fire within the mind that whispered across epochs, remember, wonder, endure. That fire lives now in every act of kindness, in every struggle for truth, in every quiet reaching toward what lies beyond. Our world may be changed beyond recognition, our tools forged of wire instead of stone, yet still, we stand at morning's edge, holding the same fragile torch first lit beneath forgotten stars. Let it guide us where memory cannot. Let it remind us that ours is not a story of ending, but of becoming. The past does not sleep. It breathes through us, through the choices we make and the stories we dare to carry. And as the final traces of dream dissolve into waking thought, may we move onward not just as survivors, but as stewards of a fire too sacred to forget the fire that made us human. What it means, then, to be human is not bound in victories long past, nor futures promised, but in the quiet, burning refusal to forget. To carry stories across time, not as relics, but as lifelines. To honor ashes without letting them smother the flame. The fire Homo sapiens lit tens of thousands of years ago was never only for warmth. It was a signal to the cosmos, a declaration to the void, that something had awakened on Earth with the courage to wonder. And now, as the last shadow of night pulls away, and history exhales into a brightening sky, we are left with not certainty, but inheritance to remember those who vanished, to listen for what remains, and to keep dreaming forward, step by step, until our fire, too, lights the dreams of the next unknown mind. And beneath that brightening sky, as echoes fade into the hush of dawn, let this be the last breath of the telling, not a farewell, but a torch passed forward. Homo sapiens rose from the smoke and silence of forgotten ages, not because they were destined, but because they dared to love in a world of danger, dared to imagine meaning within the chaos, dared to carve permanence into impermanence. Their triumph was not the erasure of others, but the preservation of connection across the unfathomable divide of time. And now, in the stillness before the world fully wakes, we inherit that quiet act of defiance to speak, to remember, to dream. The story of how Homo sapiens outsmarted every other human species ends not in dominance, but in devotion. Devotion to the fire, to the memory, to the unbroken thread of wonder that binds us to all who have come before. Let it rest here, gentle in the light, not over, but quietly waiting, sleeping now, in the marrow of our becoming, ready to rise when the next dream calls it forth. So let this story settle now, like embers beneath starlit ash, glowing quietly in the marrow of memory, not extinguished, only resting. For even at the end of this long remembering, one truth whispers louder than any final word, that to be human is not to hold power, but to channel it, to take the fragile thread of all who came before and weave it forward with care. We are not the last light, nor the first fire. We are the keepers of continuity, the stewards of meaning passed down through blood, breath, and dream. The tale of how Homo sapiens outsmarted every other human species does not close with bold declarations or triumphant cries. It fades gently, like morning mist, into the knowing that the story never truly belonged to us alone. It is everyone's now, theirs, ours, and those still to come. And in that endless sharing, the fire endures, quiet, sacred, and waiting. So let it fade not into silence, but into continuation, along the ridgelines of memory, and into the dim, sacred hush before thought begins again. May this long fire settle into embers bright enough to guide, soft enough to rest beneath. For the story never sought an ending, only a witness. And we, like those before, are the breath between verses, the pause between footfalls, the dream within the dream. This is how we carry the legacy not as a burden, but as a song sung low beneath the stars, telling of who we were, who we became, and who we may yet dare to be. The tale of Homo Sapiens, of fire and shadow, of survival and story, does not close here. It rests within us, quiet and awakening, ready tonight to cradle in sleep, and tomorrow to quietly begin again. And so it returns to us, the eternal flame, not born from conquest but from care, not carved from certainty, but whispered into being by those who once knelt beside ancient fires, dreaming of mornings they would never see. Homo sapiens, the unlikely keepers of all the questions, passed through blood and silence to become the guardians of the unfinished. Their footsteps are buried now, erased by time and tide, but their story walks with us, still carried not in bones, but in the flicker of memory before sleep takes hold. Let this final ember guide us gently back into that sacred quiet from which all dreams emerge. The fire does not die here. It coils within every breath, every wonder, every hand reaching toward the unknown. For in remembering, we become. In passing the story forward, we endure. And in silence, in deepest rest, we promise once again, the flame will rise. So let us sleep now, wrapped in the breath of centuries, soothed by the fire we did not start but vowed to keep alive. The story of Homo sapiens, their ascent, their memory, their dreaming, is not a history to be shelved, but a light to be carried, humbly, faithfully, each time the dark returns. We are not the end of this thread, nor its origin, but the hands holding it now, deciding whether to weave it stronger or let it fray. Beneath the stars that watched our first questions shimmer into flame, nothing is forgotten. Every echo, every silence, every vanished face finds form again in the stories we choose to tell. This is how we outsmarted the others, not with domination, but with devotion to meaning. And as our breath slows and the night deepens into rest, know this: the fire still glows, tender and undying, ready to be dreamt forward by the next soul brave enough to remember. The story waits, as it always has, curled softly beneath the skin of sleep. And in that final quiet before waking in the space between dream and daylight, we come to understand what the fire has always meant. Not just warmth, not just survival, but witness. A flame carried not through conquest, but through care, through grief transformed into story and silence offered as song. Homo sapiens did not become the last of their kind because they vanquished all others, but because they wove remembrance into every act of living. Their rise was not a culmination, but a commitment to keep the voices of the lost alive in their own breath, to shape tomorrow from fragments of yesterday, and to honor not just the victory of survival, but the beauty of meaning carried forward through time. As morning opens the sky once more, let us go gently, reverently, into whatever lies ahead, not as conquerors, but as keepers of a tale still unfolding, a fire still glowing, a species still dreaming. The story doesn't end here. It rests, ready to rise, when wonder calls again. So rest now not as an ending, but as the sacred pause between what came before and all that will follow. In this final breath before the world wakes, trust that the fire kindled by distant ancestors still flickers within you. It guided them through the abyss of unknowns and will guide us still through futures just as dark, just as full of possibility. The story of Homo sapiens is not one of conquest, but of care, of remembering, of daring to dream across time. We are not alone in our wandering, not alone in the quiet. As the curtain of sleep draws close, feel the warmth of every story that brought you here, woven not from certainty, but from the fragile and holy act of choosing to endure. And in that warmth, let go, not into darkness, but into memory, not into silence, but into sleep, where the fire lives, embered and eternal, waiting gently for the next voice to lift its light once more. Tonight, as breath slows and sleep descends, the story is not over. It is simply waiting. The fire rests in quiet rhythm, nestled in the space behind thought, beneath skin, below language itself. It has passed through eras and extinctions, not to blaze in glory, but to glow in presence. Each time we close our eyes, we enter the same timeless rhythm where our ancestors dreamed by the light of embers, wondering who they were and who they might become. Now we carry that dream forward, not perfectly, not boldly, but lovingly. And though the tale of how Homo sapiens outsmarted every other human species may now lay quiet, its heartbeat endures, in our remembering, in our becoming, in this sacred hush of history made flesh. So rest not in ending, but in the promise that tomorrow, the fire will rise again, softly and surely, beneath another awakening sky. Let this be the place we leave it not behind, but within. The long journey of Homo sapiens, that unlikely species who turned shadows into songs and survival into significance, does not vanish with the closing of this tale. It nests in us, soft as breath, steady as dawn, woven through the marrow of our remembering. We did not outlast the others with strength alone, but with story, with the quiet, defiant promise that no voice, no vision, no fragile wonder would be lost to time. And now, as the final echo fades into the hush of tomorrow, the flame passes once more not as conquest, but as care, offered from hand to hand in the long twilight between what has been and what might still burn. The story sleeps now, cradled in the stillness behind our eyes. But when the stars return and the world grows quiet again, it will stir, as it always has, waiting, watching, ready to rise. So, let this final breath drift, like smoke across the span of aeons, a quiet offering to the vast unknown from which we all emerged. The journey of Homo sapiens is not a tale of destiny carved in stone, but of fragile paths chosen in darkness, lit only by the flicker of belief. We survived not because we were greater, but because we remembered to feel, to fear, to hope, and to tell stories about it all. That is our inheritance, as sleep returns and the world hushes once more. Not the triumph of a species, but the song of its soul. A song sung softly across time, woven from memory and dream, and carried forward on the breath of each new tomorrow. Let that be the last sound tonight. Not the end, but the fire humming gently in the marrow of us all, alive, eternal, and waiting to be dreamed anew. And now, with the story threaded delicately through every breath of night, we release it into the sacred stillness that follows. The triumph of Homo sapiens was never etched in stone or crowned in fire, but carried in the soft resilience of those who dared to wonder where others could not. It lives in every whispered prayer beneath the stars, in the slow unfolding of story across generations, and in the promise that no dream, once kindled, need ever be extinguished. So let sleep embrace us not as forgetfulness, but as remembrance deepened. The fire hums low now, nestled in bone and breath, waiting for the next dreamer, the next question, the next life to pick up the thread and continue the tale. For the story of how we outsmarted the others was never about endings. It was about the light we carry, quiet, stubborn, sacred, into all that lies ahead. And so this final moment settles, quiet as dust over ancient footprints, sealing the long breath of a story that never truly ends. The journey of Homo sapiens, from trembling shadows on prehistoric plains to constellation gazers and map makers of thought, pulses on, not in the monuments we've built, but in the memories we've tended. We did not arrive here alone, and we do not walk forward empty. Held within us is every vanished face, every unsung word, every ember of the fire we swore to carry. This was never just about survival. It was about becoming the vessel through which memory, imagination, and the sacred ache for meaning could pass unbroken. The stars still turn, as they did for the first storytellers, and beneath their gaze we turn inward, cradle the hush, and surrender not to silence, but to the warmth of what endures. Rest now, where dream meets memory. The fire is safe, the story sleeps, and somewhere, already, it begins again. So let this final whisper linger, not as an ending, but as the breath held before the next step into the unknown. The story of Homo Sapiens, of fire tended through millennia and meaning passed through silence, has brought us here, to this quiet edge of sleep where memory and future intertwine. We did not walk this path alone, and we do not rest without purpose. The fire that once shivered against cave walls now flickers softly in the folds of our dreaming. Let it glow, eternal and unbroken, through every night that comes. For as long as we let wonder guide us, as long as we carry the stories of those who came before, the flame will not falter. It will rise in the pauses, in children's questions, in the hush before dawn, always rising, always remembered. And with that, we rest. Not in darkness, but in light carefully preserved. The story sleeps now, and so do we, keepers of the fire, wrapped gently in the memory of becoming human. And as the light of day spreads fully across the world, brushing mountaintops and rusting leaves with the same warmth that once fell on ancient skin, we rise again not just as a species, but as a chorus of memory, still singing. What began as embers in forgotten grottos, as footsteps on untamed soil, has become something enduring, something astonishing. A consciousness unbroken by time, seeded by sorrow, watered by wonder. In every sunrise, one can still hear the whispers of those who did not last, feel the presence of those remembered in silence. This is the legacy of Homo sapiens, not a monument, but a light passed onward through choice and reverence. So let us carry it forward, not hurriedly, not as conquerors, but as guardians of the sacred thread between breath and story, between knowing and dreaming. The fire has not dimmed, it only waits. And in every act of remembering, we promise once more. The dawn was never ours alone. It belongs to every mind that dared to imagine it would come. So here, in the final hush between night and becoming, let us hold the memory like flame cupped in trembling palms. The tale of Homo sapiens is not locked behind us, nor fated ahead. It is alive, coiled in the marrow of our dreaming, unfolding with each breath we dare to give to wonder. We are the long echo of firelight against stone, the continuation of every silent voice that came before, and though history may one day forget our names, may it never forget the light we carried. Let this be the last breath before waking, not an ending, but the softest beginning. The fire is safe, the story is remembered, and through us it will rise again. And now, with the sky lifting its veil and the hush of prehistory fading into the living sounds of day, we close this chapter in quiet reverence. The story of Homo sapiens rests not in victory songs, but in the echo of fires once kindled to keep fear at bay and hope alive. We outlasted, not as the strongest, nor the most certain, but as the keepers of a fragile flame, the aching need to remember, to imagine, to preserve meaning in the face of forgetfulness. That is the inheritance we walk with now, whether across bustling cities or silent forests, holding the echo of a quest that began beneath stars older than time. So step into the day gently, cradling the story stitched into heartbeat and breath. Know that the fire remains, the memory endures, and the dream, ancient and waiting glow still in every question, every story, every spark of wonder daring once more to rise. And so, let the last word be not a farewell, but a breath, the breath of an ancient dream returning home, across epochs of silence and storms. From the flicker of the first torch to the digital hum of the present, the journey of Homo sapiens burns steady, not perfect, not unbroken, but enduring. Let this final image settle into the folds of our mind as sleep reaches gently for us, a handprint on stone, a glowing ember, a whispered name lingering in the hush. We are the continuation, not the conclusion. May we carry the memory forward with care, not as conquerors of the past, but as guardians of its meaning. And, as night folds into light, let the fire remain quiet, living, and ready, because the story never truly ends. It simply waits, tender and eternal, for the next dreamer to open their eyes and begin again. So let that be our final gesture, not to close the fire within a tomb of memory, but to send its warmth gently forward, through soft breath and conscious care. The tale of Homo sapiens does not conclude here, but continues like a river fed by vanished springs flowing onward, reshaped yet unbroken. We walk now with echoes in our steps, stars in our gaze, and a story in our chest, daring to carry not the triumph of being last, but the responsibility of remembering all who once walked beside us. As the light reclaims the edges of the world and sleep loosens its hold, know this: the fire has passed into you. Not to burn, but to guide. Not to dominate, but to dream. The long silence gives way once more to morning, and with it, the story begins again, in every life that chooses to remember, to reach, and to keep the flame alive. And thus, with morning now fully risen, and the long echo of deep time still humming gently in the folds of thought, we close the story not with finality, but with reverence. The fire that once danced before trembling hands, the symbols etched in darkness by ancient fingers, the voices that dreamed aloud when no future was guaranteed, they all live within us still. Homo sapiens did not ascend alone, nor without loss, but their triumph, fragile and luminous, became a legacy of meaning carried through millennia like a sacred breath. So as we step quietly into the day, let that legacy rest not behind us, but within us, a soft ember in the chest, warm with promise, aglow with the knowledge that we are not the end, but the continuation. The story remembers, the fire sleeps, and when twilight returns and silence gathers once more, it will be there, waiting, ready to burn again with the light of all who dared to dream. The sun rises, but the story does not end. It lingers, quiet as dust on stone, steady as breath beneath ribs. In this closing light, we are reminded that the tale of Homo sapiens is not bound to history books or fossil beds, but lives on in every question we ask, every memory we protect, every dream we refuse to let fade. We are the descendants of wonder, not of conquest, but of care. And the fire they ignited, so long ago beneath alien skies, still pulses in our chests, asking not for victory, but for vigilance to remember, to imagine, to carry meaning forward. So as we rise now, full into the day, let us do so softly, reverently, with the ember of this story glowing steady and sure. The journey is never truly finished. It waits in the hush between thoughts, in the silence behind song, in the eyes of those not yet born. And in that waiting, it continues lit by fire, held in memory, and ready to begin again. So let the day carry us now, not away from the story, but deeper into its unfolding. For the legacy of Homo sapiens was never a tale we could conclude, only one we live into, breath by breath, memory by memory. We are not just the recipients of ancient fire, but its stewards, its keepers, its quiet choosers. And if there is one final truth to carry forward, it is this: the fire was never meant to be buried in stone or lost to myth. It was meant to move, to live, to speak through us each time we wonder, each time we care, each time we dare to remember. That is how we outsmarted the others. That is how we became more than survival. In that sacred act of dreaming forward, the human story hums on as ember, as echo, as promise still burning beneath the skin of dawn. So with every breath drawn in this newborn day, know that the flame lives not in myth, but in motion in us, in the ones before, and in those yet to awaken. The story of Homo Sapiens, of wonder woven into survival, is not a closed chapter, but an unfolding vow, a fire that flickers still in the pause between heartbeat and thought, waiting to be tended by hands that remember. We did not outlive our kin through dominance alone, but through reverence, through the sacred act of keeping the past alive in the shape of the future. As the light settles across this ancient earth, may we carry that reverence with us, gently, fiercely, for the fire is ours now, and the story, at once ancient and unborn, finds its voice again each time we dare to listen. This is not the end. It never was. It's the ember passed forward, sacred and alive, waiting to be dreamt anew, always becoming, always human. Let that be enough, a fire that continues, a story that breathes. As we return fully to waking life, surrounded by the echoes of ancient questions and quiet dreams, may we not forget what flickered beside us through the long night. This was not just a story of Homo sapiens rising above others, but of humanity awakening to itself through memory, through meaning, through unrelenting curiosity. That spark, tended across millennia, now rests in us, not as burden, but as invitation, to carry forward the fragile flame of wonder, to honor what came before by imagining what might still be. So let this moment be a threshold, not an end, the final hush before the world exhales once more. And in that breath, may the legacy of those who walked before live on quietly, fiercely, endlessly. The fire endures. The story waits. And now, we go as they once did into the light, with memory in our bones and the dream burning softly within. So go now, gently, into the brightness that follows the dream, carrying with you the quiet inheritance of all who came before. Let the weight of their memory be not heavy, but holy, a reminder that the story of Homo sapiens was never ours to own, only to carry. In firelight and silence, in lullabies and legacy, we became more than survivors. We became vessels of meaning, cradlers of the infinite, guardians of a story too sacred to let slip into oblivion. And whether we walk through forests or cities, speak in whispers or in code, that story thrums beneath us still, asking not for greatness, but for presence. The fire is with us. The ancestors are with us. And though this telling ends here, it ends only so it might be born again in another voice, another night, another dream. Let it rest now, glowing. Let it wait, ready. The story continues. And now, in this final breath before the fire truly rests, let us cradle the story with the same tenderness our ancestors once showed, the flickering flames that shielded them from the dark. What we inherit is not mere survival, but the sacred rhythm of remembering. The tale of how Homo sapiens outsmarted every other human species ends not with dominance, but with devotion. A devotion to questions that never find their final answer, to voices silenced by time yet carried in blood, to the fire that asks not to conquer, but to illuminate. Let that light settle gently behind our eyes as sleep arrives, not extinguishing the flame, but folding it into the marrow of our being. The story is complete now, not in the way tales close, but in the way seeds lie waiting beneath soil, carried forward, dreamed anew, alive in us, and ever becoming. So let the closing of this long dream be nothing more than a sacred breath, the quiet release of a story told not to end, but to endure. For the journey of Homo sapiens was never meant to culminate in finality, but to ripple timelessly forward, reshaped by each who dares to hold the flame with care. What began as sparks in ancient caves now flares subtly within the synapses of memory, glowing softly in the hush of bedtime and beneath the heartbeat of thought. And as the last light folds gently into waking, we carry with us more than a tale, we carry a testament. That to be human is to remember, to imagine without restraint, and to walk onward through the darkness, not with fear, but with fire. The story sleeps now, nestled warmly in the silence we leave behind. But it dreams still, waiting not to be concluded, only to be continued. And if this story has taught us anything, let it be this: that our journey was never solo, never singular, but always part of a chorus, ancient, unbroken, and unfinished. The brilliance of Homo sapiens did not lie in erasure, but in embracing echoes, in turning silence into song and grief into legacy. We do not carry this flame for ourselves alone. We hold it for all those whose names never made it to stone, whose dreams flickered briefly and vanished into ice. And now, as the final veil of night lifts and the light of today stretches across the long road behind us, we do not close the book, we open it anew. Memory is still alive, the fire still warm, the story still whispering. In every breath we take, and every story we dare tell, Homo sapiens continues the one great journey, not of domination, but of devotion to all that ever dared to dream. So let the flame rest once more, softly glowing. The night is over. The fire remains. And so, beneath the vast ceiling of sky that has witnessed every rise and fall, every question whispered, and every flame kindled, the journey folds itself gently into the quiet. Homo sapiens did not ascend through force, but through memory, a fragile, luminous thread spun from wonder, wound across generations by voices too ancient to name. That thread now stretches into us, woven through the hush of night and into the fabric of morning's breath. We are the dream that endured, the echo that answered silence with meaning. And as the last ember settles into stillness, let it be enough to know that the fire never truly fades. It lingers not to blaze, but to guide, to remind us that the story is never gone, only resting, waiting for another mind, another heart, to lift it gently again. The telling sleeps now, the flame is safe, and the becoming always continues. So let the tale rest here, not with finality, but with reverence like ashes cradled beneath the roots of a living tree. The legacy of Homo sapiens was never in torchlit triumphs or towering monuments, but in their quiet vow to remember. Through ice and fire, through silence and sorrow, they chose to carry meaning like breath, fragile but unbroken. And now, as the final words settle into the hush between night and daylight, we carry that vow deeper than story, into the marrow of what it means to be human. Let the fire sleep, let the echoes fade, but let the memory endure. For in the long chain of becoming, each of us is the next link. Each of us is the new breath. And in the quiet after everything has been said, the flame still glows, not as a relic, but as a promise to dream forward, with care, with courage, and with eyes forever open to the wonder from which we came. And thus, as the last breath of this long remembering exhales into the morning, what lingers is not a conclusion, but a gift, a fire kept alive through language and longing, from trembling ancestors peering into the unknown to us standing here, wondering still. The story of how Homo sapiens outsmarted every other human species was never only about intelligence. It was about inheritance of awe, of struggle, of the sacred ache to matter. And as the quiet settles in behind this final word, let it light within us a quiet vow to carry the fire not just through knowledge, but through compassion, not as a victory cry, but as a whispered promise to every vanished footprint beneath our feet, that we remember, that we imagine, that we endure. The telling may rest now, but the flame, the story endures, always becoming, always human. And now, as the journey returns softly to the silence it came from, let the final ember rest gently in the hollow of the heart. The tale of Homo sapiens was never meant to blaze unending, but to glow with meaning, a slow flame passed from soul to soul across time's endless dusk. We were not just survivors, we were secret keepers, dream bearers, memory shapers. And as the hush returns, as the breath slows and the world folds neatly into day, let us carry this final truth with tenderness, that we did not outsmart the others to stand alone, but to ensure the song would never cease. That beneath the ash, beneath the weight of history's unspoken, the fire was always waiting not to destroy, but to remember. And though the story lies still now, sleeping in the folds of minds too ancient to name, it lives on in us. It lives as long as we wonder, as long as we care, as long as we dream. So, go softly. Light in your chest, fire in your marrow. The story is safe now. The rest is silence and promise. And with that final flicker of thought, we step over the threshold from story into stillness, from remembering into becoming. The journey of Homo sapiens, threaded through shadows and stars, leaves us not with triumph, but with tenderness, an understanding that our greatest legacy is not that we rose alone, but that we carried every lost voice with us. In the hush that follows, as dawn claims the edges of the world and sleep releases its hold, let this final ember rest quietly within, not to vanish, but to remain a quiet vow woven through breath and bone. That we will remember, that we will dream, that we will keep the fire lit, not for ourselves alone, but for all minds yet to open, for all hearts yet to beat in time with wonder. The story sleeps, but it is not over. Its light endures in us silently, sacredly, until the stars return and another voice dares to begin again. And so we arrive, not at an end, but at the quiet turning point where memory becomes legacy, and story settles gently into the marrow of who we are. The journey of Homo sapiens is not a tale sealed in time, but a living breath passed through darkness and dawn alike. They outsmarted not by conquest, but by care, by tending the sacred fire of wonder, keeping it alive in lullabies, in questions, in the hush that follows every act of survival. That fire lives in us now, glowing beneath each heartbeat, waiting not for retelling, but for continuation. The story sleeps, not forgotten, but fulfilled, until someone, somewhere, finds themselves standing in the dark and dares once more to imagine light. This is how it endures. This is how we become. And now, let sleep come. The fire is safe. The remembering is complete. And the next chapter waits, where it always has, just beyond the edge of silence. Let the final image linger, not of Homo sapiens triumphant, but of a hand resting near ancient embers, warmed not by conquest, but by the need to carry meaning into the unknown. In that image is the essence of our story. One species among many, not chosen, but choosing to remember, to question, to dream. So as the fire dims now into glow, and the last whisper of deep time merges with the stirrings of the present, let this be the closing breath, not an ending, but a gift entrusted to each who listens. A gift wrapped in silence and song, in firelight and memory. The tale does not stop here. It rests within us, ancient, glowing, ready. And when the next dream dares to wake it, the flame will rise again, always alive, always human. So as this long breath of memory releases into the hush of waking, let us hold the weight of the story not as burden, but as blessing. The tale of Homo sapiens, of those who dared to remember when forgetting was easier, who dreamed forward when darkness pressed close, now lies quiet within us, waiting to be lived, not retold. It has traveled through soot and bone, fire and frost, held aloft by hands long vanished, carried through the marrow of generations. And now, in this final moment before morning fully claims us, the flame is passed once more, steady, sacred, and alive. May we tend it not with certainty, but with love. May we carry the question, not the answer. And may we walk softly into the next great unknown, with fire in our hearts and story on our breath. The tale of how we outsmarted the others is done, but the human journey, fragile, wondrous, eternal, begins again, with us.